I'm Vactor, and Magneto was right. This is Shaw.
What'd you expect? Black leather?
Yeah! That was a quote from Shaw Saturday Night and from X-Men 97, Episode 9, Tolerance's Extinction, Part 2. All right, we're going to have Super Tim join us a little bit later in the recording, but for right now, it's just going to be me and Super Shaw. So Shaw, this is Part 2 of the finale of this season, Tolerance's Extinction. We have, as you know, if you've been listening to us or if you've been watching us, we have been praising this show all season long. It is my current favorite show on television. Shaw, what'd you think about this second part of the finale?
Woo, still cooking. Still cooking. It's like Thanksgiving. They just keep cooking, keep bringing out more and more meals, more and more sides to enjoy. I love it. It's wild to me that a show can be this consistently good with no downers. Like there's not a single dip. If anything, it is a constant uptick, like an incline in quality, and that's amazing because it started out at a 10. Like, how do you get better than that? But somehow they keep the quality up. They make it even more engaging. I will say this: it's not accessible for someone just coming into it, right? Like, it's a serialized show. You have to follow it from the story from the get-go, so you can't just like jump in and watch an episode. Whereas X-Men 92 or like the animated series was much more, you could watch it out of order. It didn't really matter too much. There were certainly arcs, but they were independently defined into like 3 episodes or 2 episodes or something like that. So but this is what we wanted. This is what we needed. After 20 plus years of waiting, we finally have it. I love it.
This has been a great kind of, I think the same way that if you are longtime Vactorverse fans, you know that I praised My Adventures with Superman as the gateway to someone who is not familiar with Superman, somebody who's like, oh, why is Superman? And especially because the last 10 years, Shaw, the live action Zack Snyder Superman has not really given people a reason to like Superman, to me. Now, there's a lot of Snyder fans out there, but the My Adventures with Superman show is something that I can hand to somebody and say, this is why I love Superman. This is why he is hope. This is, what exemplifies him. I think X-Men 97, I agree with you what you said about like there's a lot of backstory that you'd be missing out on if you didn't watch the 92 show. But with this, I feel like somebody who says, why is X-Men popular? Why is X-Men a thing, right? You can hand this to them and be like, this is X-Men. All of the drama, all of the action, the comedy, everything that I think X-Men is in the comics, this show is. And so I'm really happy to be like, if somebody doesn't know anything about X-Men, you can hand them this X-Men 97 and be like, this is X-Men right here. So I've been very pleased by this show.
And another thing that's really amazing is, it was billed as X-Men 97, a direct continuation of the prior show that we watched all those years ago. And it would be enough just to pick up the adventures where we left off. But the Bo DeMeo does an excellent job of dipping back into the lore and making things that were just like little breadcrumbs in the past make sense now. So it's not just like, okay, here's where the story ended, let's pick it up and go from here. No, he's giving us homework because he's done all the due diligence of going back into these prior episodes, finding the little nooks and crannies of things that he wants to like grab from, take those nuggets with him, and that like helps form and inform the story that he's going to tell. And it's that, to me, I think is partially why this show has been so great and so successful, is because it's not just taking the baton, but it's honoring what came before in a really big way as well. So It's not just nostalgia, it's educated.
Yes. How much fun has that added to this versus if we were just creating it with no knowledge of X-Men 92, no knowledge of the comics, no knowledge of even Bo DeMeo referenced Star Trek: The Next Generation
Yes.
as an influence and as homework. So I feel like he is probably similar age to us. Like I haven't looked up his bio, Shaw, but I think he's got that same sense of the 90s, the same nostalgia, and also from an adult standpoint, taking these things that we loved as a kid and then making them for not only kids but also for adults now. And so you have that different lens that you're looking at these things versus what you were looking at X-Men 92 with. Now you're having this. And you've
Right.
made a great point. Him referencing old stuff, the Bastion's mom and Bastion's dad being in the background, and they were just throwaway characters, and then you're like, oh, now we're retroactively looking back. Now that was his mom, that was his dad, and those were the people that formed him. And I think we said it on last week's show. The way that they have condensed Bastion in this has been fantastic for
True.
a new viewer or even for us, for comic fans. The way that they've simplified it, I kind of wish they would do that in the comics. And another one that I was kind of thinking about is Onslaught, which is Professor Xavier and Magneto in one body. If they could condense Onslaught and make that the either in the next episode that we see or in season 2 bring in Onslaught, if they could do what they did with Bastion with Onslaught, that would be fantastic. I would
Well,
love to see
I think
that.
we're headed that direction personally.
Ooh,
Yeah, I feel like we're headed there. So
yes.
just based on what the comics are doing, I think we're headed that direction. So
Yeah. So with this episode, we got to see the blue team, the gold team. We got to see an expansion of kind of the X universe, as well as we got Professor Xavier back. Shoff, he's back in his old wheelchair because all the technology has been turned off for a bit, and then got
yeah,
destroyed in the mansion.
that's a good point. Yeah.
I'm interested to hear your thoughts because this was something that I saw a lot of pushback on Twitter, on Instagram. A lot of people were, why are they going back to the old uniforms? Why are they going back to the retro stuff? What was your take on that? Just as a X-Men fan, and then as a fan of this show, did you like them going back to the old uniforms, or did you think, oh, that was not a good choice?
Um. Well, I think the to my understanding, the reason why, like, my justification for it, like the mental hurdle of being like, oh, okay, they changed costumes, is because everything else was burned in the fire, right? Like, whatever they were wearing or weren't wearing, like they only had one left, or they didn't have any at all, so they needed something to wear. And being that Muir Island has their former base and a bunch of technology, their gadgets, and old costumes, it made sense. And also, Bo DeMeo has gone on record and said that it was the intention from the start of this season to get them back into their Uncanny X-Men outfits. Um, I mean, I personally hope they're here to stay. It was kind of a nice change. It was cool. I mean, I love the look of that we're used to for X-Men 92 costumes, but I did not have one issue whatsoever with seeing them in the Uncanny outfits. It was great. I did
Yeah,
have one issue though, and I have to bring
yes,
this up because I
yes.
laughed. So I wrote this down as a note because if I didn't catch it on my first watch, but on my second time through. So the mannequins that they pass by, like
Hmm,
the
yes.
gallery of costumes, right?
Hmm.
So they have their costumes on them, but in addition to the costumes, the ones that are the females also have wigs that
Ah, yes,
that
right.
look. I mean, they're like exactly like what, like Rogue's hair, especially Rogue's hair, which is so unique, right? It's got like the
That
bits of
streak.
white and
Yeah. Hmm.
red, and it's all like stringy and like curly and stuff, right? So and then Storm's hair being longer, which is funny. And then because it wasn't long, right? Like
Right. It
in the early
started
part of
with
the season, it was
the
a
mohawk.
mohawk,
Yeah.
right? And then Jean Grey's red hair. All of those mannequins have the corresponding wigs, which is so weird to me because I mean, I wish there was an example of a guy like his costume, but not with a wig, just to see like, okay, it's just a mannequin, right? Like you don't need to dress up the mannequin like that. But then I was like, well, maybe it's just a gallery. Maybe they're not actually grabbing the costumes from it. It's just meant to symbolize this is our team, right? Except that's not true. They are using that to grab their costume from, because Jean Grey takes the mask, the eye mask. Cyclops takes his thing and he's like fixing his eyepiece. Storm is putting on her headband. And even Wolverine is pulling on his gloves. So they are taking from that gallery, which begs the question: why do they have wigs? It's so
Yeah,
weird
that
and
is funny.
unnecessary. I get the look, the aesthetic makes sense, but if you're going to be grabbing costumes from it, why put a wig on? I don't get that.
Yeah. I think they specifically put the males with tops. So Wolverine has his top, so you
Right.
can't see his hair. Cyclops has his cap, and then Xavier's bald.
Right,
So I think
exactly. That was my point. I
they
was like, if Xavier
yeah.
had hair, he would have been the only one we could like
Yeah.
justify it. Because if he didn't get a wig and he had hair, then there's no reason why the women should have
Right.
wigs too.
Right. That is funny. I didn't even think about that. But it's a great visual of
It is a great visual. Yeah.
the women's hair and the 80, like it makes me think about that X-Men arcade game, because it was around that time that they had those uniforms on. So every time I see those specific ones, I think about that X-Men arcade game.
Oh yeah.
And I also liked what Bo DeMeo said on Twitter. It's all of this stuff is kind of Ouroboros loop. It's like it's all the same. It's what Xavier said. We've been here before. It's all a visual representation of how history continues to repeat itself,
Ooh.
even when we are in the seemingly unpredictable tide of chaos. And for all the talk of change and progress, the X-Men are back in the classic scenario: humans wanting to kill mutants, fighting
Yeah.
Magneto, just like old times. So I
Yeah.
like the synergy of all of
Yeah.
that stuff, and it just goes to show, again, I don't know how many times I can praise this man, but I think he was thinking about it from the start when he was plotting out the script, when they were plotting out the episodes. I want to make this a love letter to the old X-Men, but I also
Right.
want to make it modern. I want to make it something that we today can recognize, and they've succeeded in that. Like that was their goal. They succeeded in making it good for all of those levels. So I'm in for all of these things that they're doing in this.
Storm
And
even said something to that effect when she was they were on their mission and she was flying next to Forge's I guess it was like an OG Blackbird. I don't remember that, but maybe that's like the Claremont Blackbird is my guess.
I didn't either.
But she was saying something to that effect to Jean Grey before they all
Mhm.
split up, and saying it's all the same. It's all the same.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, you're right on. That makes perfect sense. That's a great
Yeah.
point. That's a
So
great point.
they kind of said it in the subtext, and then they also said it like within
Yeah.
the show, the context
Yeah.
of the actual dialogue. But man, all of this stuff, huge action scenes with Sentinels and Bastion and all these guys. I loved the little moment when Beast and Forge met up, and
Yes.
Forge explained his leg and his electro whatever shield that he made up, mumbo jumbo. But it was like, this makes perfect sense. And the best moment to me was when he asked Forge, "How did you do that?" He's like, "I thought about it."
That's
And I was
okay.
like,
I put that
yes.
note in there. It's like my second or third note. I was like, this exchange is so great. Beast is like, oh me, oh my, how my friend? And Ford just goes, thought about it.
Yes.
He's such a badass. I love that.
Yes.
Forge, I always liked Forge as a kid, but he was barely in any episodes.
Right.
Like he was only in a few, very briefly. A lot of times it was just the time travel episodes.
Yeah. You didn't really have a lot to sink your teeth into unless you were reading the comics. If you were
I always thought he was cool looking character, and I always wanted to know more. And just like getting to hear like his voice come through, and that sort of that real like uber confidence that doesn't come across as like being too egotistical, just like he knows what he can do.
Right.
It's so great, and it really exemplifies what his power is, right? Because if he can think it, he can make it. Like,
yes.
So that's pretty cool.
Which I didn't like as a kid. I wasn't going that far into his power levels, but I was like, oh man, it's a great power to have, and it's so unique.
Yeah.
And just the way that they show it is fantastic.
There were a few things that surprised me in this episode.
Yes.
One of the things was Bastion grieving the death of his mom, or if she's
Yeah.
dead, assuming
Right.
she's dead. Because he's the one who made her that way, right? So like, it's weird that he would be like bawling, like he was dripping tears on her face.
I did think that was weird.
And then, but then he like also looks out and he's like, it's finally quiet. Like that's what he wanted, was it to be quiet. So part of me wonders, what is Bastion's true motivation here? Like, what is his end goal? Because to me, it kind of seems like he's still orchestrating this.
Yeah,
Almost
I
like he
saw.
wanted Magneto
Yes.
and Xavier to butt heads and come to a point, right?
Right.
Like, I still feel like he's pulling strings. It doesn't feel like he lost. I feel like he still sort of planned for this.
Mm. I didn't get that until I was watching some other people's thoughts, and I was watching other kind of reviews and recaps, and they said one person's theory specifically was he like he wanted Magneto to get let go. He wanted him to do that to the declare war on the humans so that they can respond and come
Yeah.
back at Magneto. We heard the mention of these Magneto protocols that the government has in place. The president, when he was talking to Xavier, said that. So that makes sense to me. When I said, when I was originally watching it, I didn't have that thought, but it makes sense that Bastion's been pulling the strings this entire time. Even Cyclops says that, and it would it would be right alongside his play, but it would be in line with everything he's done so far to have that master plan and that pulling the strings all along. So I'm
Right.
100% with that now.
Well, also because, I mean, remember he had Magneto captured, but he wasn't really doing anything to him except making him hang out in black briefs and shave him.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
so it was almost like he was just taking him out of the equation for a certain amount of time to make people think something,
Mm-hmm.
and to get the rest of the gears going that he needed to get going. So he needed him like that chess piece off the board for a moment, and then he,
because I was like, why didn't he just kill him?
Strategically necessary.
Right. This is an Omega level threat. Why
Yeah.
wouldn't he take him off the board?
Yeah.
So yeah, that makes sense that he had other plans. We'll see. Hopefully in the next episode we'll get like his full reveal. But I'm also finding Sinister interesting in that he's kind of got his own plan going on. He's got his own agenda, and he even said it to Val in the last episode, like, mutants on farms, that's what my dream is, like I can have all these test subjects. And then in this episode we saw his little thing with Jean, him controlling Cable, which that I didn't even think about, the fact that he created Cable basically and infected him with that techno-organic virus. So he would have, just like with Madeline, he would have that control. Because when that little diamond first came up, I was like, wait a minute, when did he do that? But then I thought about it, I was like, oh yeah, he created him basically. So the fact that he has that control over him, this is another kind of controversial thing online, Shoff. Do you think Jean is dead, or do you think she's still alive? I want to know your thoughts.
I think she's still alive.
Okay.
Because we didn't see her get dusted. We saw her essentially try to say goodbye. But the outcome of that, I think we're meant to believe that she's gone, but I don't think so.
Because one theory I saw was that's what drives Cable to then go back in time and try to reset things, was he went overboard, like he kills Jean, even though he doesn't see her as his mom. Maybe he does at some, because that was what broke Madeline out of her trance, when Jean kind of appealed to her and said, hey, your baby and all this stuff, like appealing to her emotional side. Maybe that's what happens with Cable. He has some type of emotional reaction to, oh, wait a minute, I just killed my mom, basically.
Right.
And that's what causes him to go back in time. We don't know, this is all speculation, but I am just curious that they didn't show, because it was the same with the Genosha thing. They didn't show Magneto or Leech, which we found out in this episode specifically. Magneto's like, I saw his, whatever the line is, I didn't write it down. I saw his eyes get melted.
His eyes get like vaporized out of his body. Yeah,
I was like, whoa. So Leech is gone. We can confirm that. And
Moira McTaggart.
Yes.
Also
killed. And Banshee, I think, was also another one. And when we went back to Muir Island, they played the little Scottish bagpipes, which they did on the original 92 show. But I don't, man, again, Shoff, we talked about this before. Half of me is like happy that they're killing everybody off, and the other half is like sad, and I'm like, man, I hope they do bring it back and Cable goes back in time and resets it. But then half of me is like, no, I don't want them to do that because then it feels like the deaths didn't matter.
Yeah.
So I'm like
See, I
torn
think
between
I think
both.
the key missing ingredient here is Bishop. The fact that
Yes,
he's
yes.
potentially still in the time stream, and we know based on Bo DeMeo's tweets about homework being the Star Trek Next Generation episode Cause and Effect, which deals with a time loop. Bishop is I think appropriately missing because he's going to come back in the finale in a big way. I think,
Yeah,
and it may involve a time loop type situation.
I think that is very likely. I quoted my friend Curtis on the last episode. We talked about Magneto and his skivvies, but he also texted me this week after this episode, and I'm trying to find it, but he was like, you know what? If Bishop does not come back, then I'm calling foul on Bo DeMeo because the only black person we have so far is Storm, and then the other one, you just lose him and he's gone. Where is he? Where is Bishop? And he was a big part of the original 92 show. And
Yeah.
we started off, wasn't he in the credits at the beginning? Which I'm loving that they're changing up the credits every week, the intro.
Good question.
And I want to say he was in it like the first couple episodes.
Yeah.
And then once he went forward in time, they switched him out. Something that was just pointed out to me, Shoff, right before we started recording. Did you notice when they pan over from the evil mutants to the X-Men, in the middle, they changed out the humans. They swapped out the humans for Prime Sentinels.
Yes,
That blew my mind. I was like, whoa, this is great. And also, I think I had theorized last week that Magneto had killed everybody that was a Prime Sentinel. And I don't think that's the case. I think there are still people that they can save. So I don't know if he's killed that many because they said like thousands died.
Yeah.
But if he really did that throughout the entire Earth and all the Prime Sentinels, I feel like it would have been millions that would have died. So I don't think he actually killed everybody. So good on Magneto. He's not a mass murderer on a huge scale, just a little scale.
Right. I mean, he's no stranger to genocide
and
his people being wiped out.
That led to a question that you asked me, Shoff, off mic, about Magneto versus Xavier.
Yeah.
And I'm of two minds on that, Shoff. I really like a lot of the things that Magneto says, but then I'm not a fan of his actions. So half of me is like, my head is with Magneto, my heart is with Xavier. That's kind of how I feel. If you ask me,
that's a good explanation. Yeah. I think that Xavier's fault is that he has lived a fairly cushioned life. And I think
except for that time when he almost got assassinated by future time travels. But besides that, yeah.
Well, what I mean is like his upbringing, right? Like
right.
Different than Magneto, than Magnus.
Yes.
Essentially, being a
Holocaust survivor,
internment camp, like
right.
His parents are killed, like the whole thing, the way he suffered and the way he witnessed prejudice and is informing a lot of his choices, right? And why he's so, and then experiencing Genosha firsthand, unlike Xavier, who had a pretty cushy upbringing and did not experience Genosha in the same way. He's more idealistic, right? And we need idealistic people. We need the dreamers, but that's when you're, a dreamer, you don't necessarily have that on the ground street experience.
Right.
And so that's why they butt heads so much is Xavier he chooses and wants to see the good. He was hopeful. Magneto's the practical realist of this is how it is, not how it could be.
Right. I think that's 100%.
And
right.
I feel like for me, I'm more practical than I am a dreamer. And so like, I feel like I resonate with Magneto more. I don't necessarily agree with his methods, but I think he gets it. He gets it way better than Xavier does of how bad it is.
Yes. So On that note, Shoff, what did you think about the ending of this with Magneto going full Fatal Attractions, pulling the metal off of Wolverine's
Right?
bones?
Oh my
Shoff.
goodness. Oh my damn. Oh my goodness. He's going ham. Yeah.
Woo!
That was crazy. I mean, we were kind of speculating it was going to happen because that was some homework that Bo DeMeo had given us to read.
I kind of wish
Fatal
he
Attraction.
hadn't given me that because I knew what was going to happen.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
would have been more surprised, but
It was a
yeah,
little
it
too
was.
on the nose with
Yeah.
that. But it is fun to be interactive like that with the fans and share that
Yes.
stuff. But there, a lot of the fight scenes were excellent. Wolverine versus Magneto was a lot of fun. I enjoyed the visuals of Jean Grey versus Cable. There was so much happening there. Like,
Even Jean versus Sinister, like his
yeah,
morphing and
exactly. Yeah,
all of
those
that.
were
That was
great.
all great
Um,
fight scenes.
the Even like all the flying around and stuff that was going down between the various characters. There was Morph turning into the Incredible Hulk. That was
Oh,
awesome. Him doing
yes,
Morph Smash.
yes,
That was hilarious. I loved it.
yes.
I'm trying to get out my notes here because I got to leave in about 5 minutes. Do you mind if I just run through a few things?
Yeah, go through your notes.
Okay. All right, so oh, I love the aspect of Magneto donning his classic outfit. We talked about costumes and being in the uncanny sort of thing. Magneto going back to his roots in that sense. I think it's an act that is very much a literal and figurative way of him shutting out Xavier and his ideals, right? So, what I also thought was interesting though is this was the first time that they had been next to each other since the prior series, right? So like I kind of felt like there should have been more of like a first like it's so great to see you again. You know, like there was none of that. Like there was no interaction between the two of them. Xavier had just crash landed at the end of the last episode, so he had not had any chance to talk to Magnus since he went up to be with Lilandra. So to me, there was should have been a little bit more of a reunion versus and a conversation about that
Right,
versus just jumping into what was at hand.
right.
But I also understand the conflict was pretty important, so it's kind of hard to hard to ignore.
Yes.
I thought it was super ironic that Cyclops effectively shut down Sunspot for calling out Professor X about Magneto, about giving Magneto like the school, right? Because Cyclops did the same thing at the beginning of the episode. He was like, you just threw him the school. And Sunspot's like, so you just threw him to school? And Cyclops was like, hey, blame game's over, pal. It's like, you just want your cake and you want to eat it too, Scott. Come on.
I loved a bunch of memes people were making of Xavier going, "Who are you?" Like because he did Sunspot hasn't even been around. And Xavier's
He
like,
was
"Huh?"
pretty outspoken for being the new guy. So Roberto's business card, his address says 1 Claremont Avenue
I caught this
in Brazil. So I thought that was clever.
Yes,
That was good.
Great.
I loved Jean's and Storm's interaction with each other. She says, "Make them mind your weather, sister." And then Storm says in response, "And them weather your mind." How brilliant. The dialogue is so good. So good in this.
Their sister relationship we've seen more of in this than we saw in the entire 5 seasons of 92.
Yeah, you're right. DeMeo's diner gets destroyed. That was pretty cool. I love that.
Yeah.
I know your genes, Gene. Mr. Sinister says that.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, "Only I know where you end and Madeline begins."
Ooh.
He's so sinister. I love Mr. Sinister. I cannot get enough of that guy. What I think is interesting though is he's funnier in the Hickman like Powers of X or Powers of 10 House of X, right? Sinister is much more like swanky, I guess you could put it like on there. He's very snarky. But I love Sinister. I love Sinister. And then I think the last thing I had was Professor X giving his big long spiel and Magneto saying, "Charles, something I've been wanting to say for a very long time. Shut up."
I was like, what
I
is he
was,
gonna say?
yeah, he like threw like the metal thing like right over his mouth. Oh gosh, that was
That was
great.
great. And him putting the helmet on Xavier, I was like, that's brilliant because now he can't like the whole
Yeah.
point of that helmet is to stop the. So yeah, that was fantastic, man. Shoff, I love all of these thoughts and all your contributions, my friend. I know you got to take off, but we love having you here. We will see you next week, Shoff, for another episode.
For the finale. Woo!
All right, and like I alluded to earlier in the episode, we are now joined by Super Tim. How are you, sir?
Gods abandon those who believe in them. Mutants do not. Decide, my X-Men.
Ooh, that is fantastic. I love it. And I love having Super Tim here talking about X-Men 97. So, um, Schaff already gave his thoughts on the episode. Spoiler alert, they were all positive. Tim, what did you think about this episode? The penultimate episode and then kind of the halfway point, the Empire Strikes Back of this three-part finale. What did you think about part 2?
I freaking loved this episode. I think it might be my favorite of the season so far, which is crazy, because I just loved all the old school elements to it, like the old costumes. They even had the old X Jet
Mm,
from the comics, which was a really nice
yes.
touch. And not only was Xavier in his old wheelchair, but he had the same like blanket over his legs that he has in the early Claremont comics.
Yes.
I
Yes. I
really
love
enjoyed
that.
that.
That was
So
fantastic. And something that Bo DeMeo said on Twitter, I actually talked about it with Schaff a little bit earlier. His basic premise of this whole thing was the more things change, the more things stay the same. Like all of these classic elements, not even just the visuals of it, but the themes of they're fighting Magneto again. You know, the humans are intolerant of them. Like all of those things that at the beginning of the season were different, right? Like Magneto
right.
was the head of the school, then they were friends with everybody. Now we're coming back to Magneto's a villain again. The humans are hating mutants again. Like all of these things are coming back around and circling back around. But like you said, the visuals of the professor, the old costumes, even Storm back to her old hair and stuff. All of those things were just chef's kiss. I think they're doing a
Yes.
great job
I
about
love them.
bringing all those things back around. Um, what did you think about the bringing? I would say there's so many questions I want to ask you, Tim. What did you think about? Let's start off with Cable. Let's go there. His relationship with Cyclops, his relationship with Jean, his mom, and then kind of his mission
Or not his
of
mom.
changing the time stream. What did you think about Cable in this episode?
Cable was great in this episode
Yes.
because we got to see him unleash his full power, which I don't think we ever saw in the original series, and we don't see that
Mm-mm.
often in the comics
Right.
because he's got the techno-organic virus, and if he uses his powers, that like not using his powers keeps his techno-organic virus at bay.
Yes.
So it'll be interesting to see what happens to him.
Yeah. I really want to see what's going to happen next with that.
Yeah, and not only seeing what happens with him, but what happens with Jean. Like I don't think she's dead at all, but it'll be interesting to see what happens with her because like he says, like my mom was a like a huge telekinetic. I can't remember the exact phrasing.
Yeah.
Like the most powerful telekinetic person, and those things tend not to skip a generation.
Yes. That
And
was
I
great.
love that. Like there were so many good lines in this episode. Like so
Yeah.
many like you know, I read at the top of the show one of my favorites, but I had quite a few ones that I just loved that were only in the first half of the episode. Um, like thought about it with Forge. Like how
That
he came up with
yes.
his little cybernetic
Yes.
limb, and
That
he's
was
like, "How'd you get
amazing.
it to bypass the magnetic field?" Like I thought about it.
That was probably my favorite line of this entire episode when he said that.
Yeah, when Jubilee says sounds like another day that ends with Y when you put it that way. Um, and when Storm comes up to our new science bros of Beast and Forge, impress me. like basically like tell me what's going on. Just says impress me. I love that. That was so great. Um,
And
and
on that same scene, when they were like, "Oh, maybe we can find a way to permanently take up, turn off his mutation," and Storm's like, "Mm-mm."
nope,
That
nope,
was
nope.
I started laughing on that one. That was great.
It's like, nope, not happening, not happening.
Yeah.
And despite the power of words, nothing spoken can heal this pain, which came from Xavier. Yeah,
Yes. Man.
lots of great stuff with with Xavier and Magneto in this episode. Because, like you said, with more things changed, more things staying the same. We're going back to that old stuff with with that relationship between Xavier and Magneto, which has been absent for most of the season. So it was nice to go back to that and see these two kind of similar minded mutants kind of battling it out.
Yeah. And we had a question from Schaff in our we have a little text message group outside of this. He asked us, Xavier or Magneto, whose side are you on? And I've been dying to know, Tim, because I said, don't tell me until we record. So Xavier or Magneto? I'll just tell you because you weren't here. Schaff said Magneto. That was the
Of
side that
course
he
you did.
fell on. And I told him I'm kind of split between my heart is with Xavier, but my head is with Magneto. Like I'm thinking about the
Right.
things that Magneto says, but I'm not 100% on his methods, the way that Magneto does things. And then Charles, I just feel like he's got the optimism. He's almost like Omega from the Bad Batch, Star Wars reference. And so I'm kind of split on both of them. But if you had to ask me to pick one, I would probably go on the Xavier side.
I would also go on the Xavier side because, like, back in Civil War when it was Team Cap versus Team Iron Man, I was always Team Cap because Cap was on the side of life and making sure that we save and protect as many people as we can. And I kind of feel like that Xavier's doing that, but
Mm,
although even his methods are kind of skewed. Like
right, right,
Magneto's methods are kind of skewed because he's like, I'm gonna kill everybody. I'm gonna kill
right.
all the humans and stuff, which he's done in the comics. You know, God loves, man kills. He had an idea to use Cerebro to kill all the humans, which we saw in the movies. But also, Xavier, as we saw in this episode where Jubilee says, or it was Jubilee or Rogue, one of the two, where she said, "Stop treating us like students and treat us like people."
Mm.
And
Yeah,
so
there's a
that kind of had me thinking.
there's
So,
a ton of stuff in the comics, especially recently with Charles that you
mm,
we haven't seen in the live action stuff. Like he's been pretty altruistic. He's been pretty good in the
well, he's
live
Patrick
action stuff.
Stewart.
Yes. So everybody kind of universally loves Xavier, but in the comics, like he's been doing stuff for years that is kind of questionable. And I won't get into it on this episode, but he's not the all loving Xavier that we know from the TV stuff and the movie stuff. So I wanted to ask you, Tim, favorite moment from this episode. There was so many
Oh,
action scenes. There was so many great speeches, Storm and Jean, Sinister. Like there's all these great
sure.
monologues and Xavier and Magneto. What was your favorite moment from this episode? You've seen it twice now.
I have seen it twice now because I loved it that much. And I haven't had time to watch all the other episodes, but I had time to watch this episode twice. So um, I really love the moment with Magneto where like he's kind of explaining like where he is as a character
Mm,
and where he said that a boy looked into my eyes like and asked me to create a better world and I failed him, and that was really powerful because and unfortunately it was confirmed that Leech was dead from that, so that's unfortunate.
yeah, I was sad
but
about that.
but I loved that. But as far as fist pumping stuff, like the entire last act of the episode was just fantastic. But if I'm gonna say something that like had me go, yeah, it was when morphed into the Hulk. uh,
Yes.
that was because so often we've seen morph into these cameos that are specific to X-Men. So to see him kind of morph into a character that's not specific to X-Men but more as of the broader Marvel universe, that was really cool. And who doesn't love the Hulk?
Yes. And I liked how he was kind of like the Spider-Man design was like the Spider-Man 90s show.
Uh
The
huh.
Hulk design was kind of like that Hulk show that came out in the 90s.
Yeah, I
If we
noticed.
see Iron Man, I'm sure it'll be that design from the 90s. Captain America was the same. So yeah, it's kind of
Yeah.
cool that it feels like there's a shared universe of the 90s Marvel shows in this that we're kind of the extension of. So yeah, that was cool. I love seeing Hulk. But again, we talked about Morph's powers and them being kind of just the physical traits and not anything
Which they
more than that.
mentioned. Well, I actually watched the credits, not the first time, but the second time, like to see like what characters they did, and I haven't been doing that all season. I don't know why I did it this time, but they showed Morph, and they specifically mentioned that it's the look and the physical abilities.
I wish they would have said something like a line in the dialogue to
Uh
say
huh.
he's not as strong as those, because if he was as strong as the Hulk, if he was strong as Juggernaut, then he would have taken those things out, I think, a lot easier. Like he wouldn't have been thrown around as
Sure.
easy, and even Quicksilver. He has a diminished power level. Like he has those powers, but on a diminished level. So I wish they would have said something. But I'm loving, and I have it every time he does it. I have a reaction because I'm thinking it's the actual person, and then I'm like, oh, it's Morph. So we
Yeah,
talked
I
about
know,
that
I
with
know,
Juggernaut,
I know.
but
But in this scene, it was specifically Morph because he says Morph Smash,
that was
which was
funny.
that was
Yeah,
funny. That was great.
yeah,
That was
that
great.
was. I really like that. Um, I was a fan of this episode. I love all of the different comic ties that they're pulling in
Oh
from,
yeah, there were so many.
whether it's Fatal Attraction or kind of Rogue hinting at that darker side of her, and she originally started out as a villain. Um, her wearing Gambit's jacket in this, and saying, kind
And
of
even
tossing it
she was
aside.
wearing her old comic costume
Yes,
too.
yes, that was
Yeah.
another one that Shoff and I did not mention in our talk. But even, man, there's so many great relationships on this show that I love going in and out between. Rogue and Nightcrawler is one that, like, that sister, the um half brother, half sister kind of connection that they have.
Yeah.
Storm and Jean's sister connection. There's just, even Wolverine and Morph. Like there's such great
Yeah.
family and ties that they have together, and that's what makes the X-Men great, is this family aspect of them. So
And
I'm just
seeing
loving
them
all of
like
those.
divided, like when Rogue and Sunspot and Roberto joined up with Magneto. When at first I'm like, no, Rogue, don't do it. But then when she gave her reasoning, like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Like I get it.
And
I
she
mean,
went down and was like going through everybody, like, you weren't here, and how many times
yeah.
has Jean died? It was like, whoa, this
Yeah,
is,
like
she's cutting
basically
everybody
like
down.
all throwing all these jokes about the animated series. Like I really like where it's like Morph was in there, was with us for 30 minutes,
Yes,
which
that was great.
for like for the actual episode was 30 minutes long, which
Yeah,
that was funny.
that was great.
So yeah, and seeing all these great like the last acts, when splitting up between Gold and Blue Team was just so like these action sequences that have been in the show have been incredible. Like it's not something we would have ever seen in the 90s. Like it would have
Right.
just been pew 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 kind of stuff.
that is
But
that's something that I think people take for granted. Like, oh yeah, action is just easy to do, and it's like, no, you got to choreograph like
uh-huh.
everything, just like in a real movie. A
Yeah,
stunt
like well
coordinator
with
and
animation you gotta like lay out each shot. Like okay, Wolverine's gonna do this, and then Magneto's gonna rip him apart, which whoa. um and like you have to make sure it looks good, and because back in the 90s they didn't have the animation, um computers. I was talking to my wife about this yesterday, talking to my wife yesterday, and I shared with her a meme, a Back to the Future thing, where they were explaining how they got Marty's shoes to self lace.
oh,
Like they basically had to tie the laces into like a section of the ground, and people would be under the ground pulling at them so they'd self lace. And she said people were just more creative with movies back then.
when you
And
didn't
and
have the
I'm like,
CG
yeah,
to
because
rely on.
if you do that scene now all you'd have to do is computer generate it, and that's not
Yes.
easy either because you got to know the right programs and
Right.
stuff like that. But yeah, I think we do take for granted because we've gotten these movies where we see these like awesome action sequences like in Civil War and Infinity War and those films, and we take for granted that that back in the '90s when we had these kind of shows, I mean, the animation wasn't that great. I mean, I love Spider-Man the animated series. It's one of my favorite superhero cartoons of all time. But even looking back at it now, like there's a lot of recycled shots that they use in that show. And so to see these like fluid, almost cinematic action sequences in X-Men '97 is such a breath of fresh air. I just love the animation in this show. I'm gonna miss it next week.
Yeah, we talked about it, I think, on a previous episode. I think them having a higher budget on this versus the '90s
Hmm.
show really
Yeah,
shows in a lot of the animation.
it does.
And it's funny, Invincible gave us kind of a behind the scenes of like the tricks that they use to kind of hide the animation, like the budget of, oh, you're not going to see them talking, and then they can animate
Yeah,
anything and reusing backgrounds and stuff like that. This show doesn't feel like that. They feel like everything is purposeful and everything is like within the budget. So I'm really liking a lot of that stuff. One thing that Schaff brought up that I thought was funny in that scene where they have the mannequins holding their costumes on Muir Island,
uh-huh.
all of the women have wigs. None of the men, like Xavier's bald,
Right.
Wolverine and Cyclops have their caps. So none of the men have their wigs. So Schaff was like, why put wigs there? Why put hair there? Now, obviously, it's for the visual of seeing
Right.
Storm and seeing Jean, but you think
But
about the
the
logistics of
actual
that.
like logistics, real life logistics of it don't make
Yeah,
sense.
so I didn't think about that when I was
I never
watching
thought
it.
about that either.
Yeah,
But now that you mention it, like those classic X-Men comics, like all the men have like either a cap or a mask or something. But for some reason for the women they didn't do that. Maybe they didn't want to hide their hair in the original comics. I don't know. That
yeah.
seems
I
like
want
an
to
interesting thought.
say Kitty. At one point, I remember Kitty Pryde having a cap at some point in one of her '80s designs. Yeah, for the most part, I think probably just visually to distinguish, hey, this is a woman. She's got long hair. Um,
Right.
in the '80s, that was probably just a thing. But yeah, man, I loved all of their designs, all of the original costumes that they were going back to. It makes me think about that X-Men arcade game every time I see all of those, the Wolverine, the golden brown design, and Nightcrawler and Storms, her black costume. All of those things make me think about that game, which I loved. I put so many quarters in that game growing up. It was fantastic.
Here's a question I want to ask you. Do you think that that the homework that Bone DeMeo has given us for this show, like basically in the second half of the season, do you think that's helped with the viewing experience, or do you think we could have been fine without it?
So for me, I'm mixed on this because on the one side, it is fun
Oh yeah,
going through all of these things, feeling like an interactivity. I think we're gonna miss that next season when he's not doing this.
yeah,
So we'll definitely have like a one-to-one comparison next season. So it's fun going through and doing all this stuff, but I got spoiled because he specifically said for homework read Fatal Attractions. I knew what was going to happen. I knew Wolverine was going
right,
to get his
right,
metal taken out. And if I hadn't, if that had been a surprise to me, like I probably would have had my Spider-Man involuntary stand-up reaction when I saw him on screen
right.
last a couple episodes ago. Wolverine's bones getting like they're going there. Whoa! But in the back of my mind, I was like, oh, I already knew that. So it wasn't as
Yeah,
big a thing for me. So I like having the
still,
homework, but then
yeah. It
it's almost
still
like
was
if you
effective.
know there's a twist and then your mind starts thinking about, okay, I know there's going to be a twist. What is the twist? Like the whole movie you're thinking, what is the twist? And then sometimes I just happen to come across the answer for let's say like an M Night Shyamalan movie or something because I'm like thinking of all the possibilities. And then when I see the twist, I'm like, "Oh, well, if I hadn't known there was a twist, I wouldn't have been thinking the whole movie." So that's kind of like the same thing here.
Sure, yeah. I think the reveal of like that last ending reveal, and man, does this show know how to just like pack a punch. I'm like, see you next week.
Yeah,
Um,
cliffhanger was great.
yeah, the cliffhangers have been great, like all season, like starting with episode 5, um, have been fantastic.
And
And
see, that was one we didn't know. We didn't know that was coming,
exactly,
and it
yeah,
was like a gut punch. It was like an adamantium claw into our side. That
yeah,
was
yeah.
that was a
But
great, yeah.
still seeing that, still seeing, like, oh my gosh, Wolverine killed Magneto. What's gonna happen next? And then that happened. Well, as soon as it happened, I was like, whoa. But then as I'm thinking about it, like, okay, that makes sense because I read that comic. Because
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And I
so
thought they were gonna do. You saw Xavier say that he had to take over Magneto's body to stop this, right? I thought that was the moment he was going to do what he does in Fatal Attractions and kind of shut Magneto's mind down, and then that leads into Onslaught, which I don't know if we're going to get that in this series. But I was talking with Shaw. If we do get Onslaught, I hope it's a simplification like they did with Bastion, where it's
yeah.
like this is it makes more sense this way than it does in the comics because there's not all these convoluted things of okay, now you got to know about X, now you got to know about Fantastic Four, Avengers, all these things. You can just know about
I
this
think if
and
they do
be
it the simple thing of it's Xavier melding with Magneto, I think audiences can get behind that. But yeah, you don't need all that convoluted stuff.
yeah, man. I can't wait to see what exactly happens there. Um, we talked about some Easter eggs in our off mic, and then also Schaff and I as we were starting this episode. The DeMeo's Cafe. When I saw that, I immediately took a screenshot and I was like, I'm gonna tell Bo DeMeo he did a good job here, putting his own name in there. He pulled a
There you
Hitchcock.
go. There you go.
Uh, I thought that was great. You caught the Claremont Avenue on Sunspot's business card,
Uh huh.
which I didn't like when I saw that, I was just thinking of Jubilee being upset, and I wasn't even looking at the text. So that was one that I didn't pick up on. The Prime Sentinels at the beginning, what's the
Yeah.
intro? Like I didn't pick up on that. So there's a ton of things in the background, or blink and you'll miss it that they're packing in here, which I love because it's on second viewings. You see these things,
Like I
or
think I mentioned this at the top of the show. Like seeing the classic X Jet from the early Claremont comics
yes,
was
yes,
really cool. Like just I really hope these suits that we got in this episode stay because I really like
yeah.
them.
I'm wondering in not only part 3 of Tolerance's Extinction, because they'll probably be, they're still there at the end of this episode if we go right into the next episode. But how far does it go past that? Like how many
Yeah.
days, how many weeks? And then Wolverine now, he's going to have the bone claws. So how long are we going to
Yeah.
get bone claw
Yeah, do you think we're
Wolverine?
gonna get that next season with Wolverine? Like, are they gonna like take away his adamantium? That would be an
I
interesting thing.
Yeah, I think maybe half a season and he'll get it back, or it
Kind of
would
like
be
with Storm and
bold.
her powers.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Because we
yeah,
didn't know how long that was going to last. And then in the comics, that was a while. I think they're going to shorten it. It's not going to be like 2 years or whatever it was. I remember that in the comics when that happened. I was like, man, this is taking forever for him to get his adamantium back. And when I was reading that, it made me feel vulnerable because I was like, oh, his claws can be broken. They're just bones now. There's nothing stopping, those from being like shattered.
yeah,
So I always felt like this vulnerability, like when I was reading the comics and I felt like I was Wolverine. So the bone claws, I wonder how long, and his healing factor takes a hit because he's like having to deal with having the metal ripped out of his body. So how long is that going to be in effect? I'm not sure, especially because we didn't get that much of Wolverine in this season. So I wonder in season 2, is he going to have a stepped up role and his powers are going to be diminished? I wonder how long that's going to happen.
yeah. That's gonna be interesting. Yeah,
So,
because we have
man,
seen those
season,
bone claws in the movies.
yes, yes,
In
yes.
X Men Origins Wolverine, which
Hmm.
whatever. But but your thoughts on the movie notwithstanding, I think we have seen that before.
Yeah,
And speaking of the movies, I mean this was spoiled for me by a trailer, but it still is a good line. Like when Cable says like, "What am I going to a ward or a circus?" and then Cyclops says, "What did you expect? Black leather." I loved that.
That
I
was
love that so much
20
because,
what 24 years in the making or whatever it
yeah,
was.
24 years in the making where we had to endure black leather on X-Men and not the actual costumes. And now we're getting not only this, but Deadpool versus Wolverine being in the classic Wolverine costume. And he looks great. And even Hugh
Yes.
Jackman's like, yeah, I should have been doing this a long time ago.
Man, only what if that universe where the black
Yes.
leather had never happened, but that does come from the Grant Morrison new X-Men run, but there it felt like something new, something fresh. And then I think in the movies it just felt like they were trying to not be like the comics. And so that I
Yeah.
didn't like that. I felt like they're, trying to say, "Oh, comics are for kids. That's for babies, we're mature and gritty here on this live action X-Men." It's funny you look at that X-Men versus like, The Dark Knight or something and it's like, "Wow, that movie looks like for kids versus something that's actually grim and gritty or dark and gritty."
Yeah.
Um what did you think about the Bastion powers, like his being able to talk to any machine, being able to control any machine? I thought the EMP, which now I didn't realize, I thought it was just okay, one EMP for the whole world that
Yeah.
wipes out all technology. But it seems like Magneto was trying to permanently turn off the Earth's like turn off
Magnetic field.
electricity.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what did you think about Bastion? His powers in this episode we saw in a different visual way, and then also what did you think about Bastion's kind of his overall plan? Because I talked about this with Schaff a little bit. Do you think he purposely let Magneto go, and he wanted Magneto to start this war? Like that was the reason why he was saving him. Was
I
that
think so. Yeah.
yeah? I
I
think
definitely think so because we see in his future, I think it was the last episode, where he wanted to, get rid of mutants and have like just humans. Um and I
very
really like,
Palpatine of him.
yes, very Palpatine of him. And his powers, in lieu of that, um I was fine with it, because it gave something for the X-Men to fight, which I won't complain about. Uh, but it didn't bother me. It didn't bother me.
I'm I'm wondering as this third episode happens, this finale episode, we need to wrap up a lot of stuff. The Bastion and Sinister combination, and then Magneto. Like, if you're thinking about villains, we've got these three villains now to kind of contend with. Bastion as the overarching guy, the big bad of this season. Sinister as like his side lackey, but then he's got his own agenda. He talked about wanting mutants to experiment on, and then he talks about Jean and his whole deal. And then we've got Magneto and his mutant kind of liberation front now kind of declaring war on humans and humanity. How are they going to wrap all of these up in
50
this
minute
last
episode.
episode?
50-minute
Ooh,
episode.
just like the Bad
That's
Batch,
that's
Tim.
like Bad Batch. I mean, I didn't think they were gonna have a 50-minute episode for the Bad Batch. I would like, because I was fine. I'm like, I'm fine. 25 minutes, that's good. But I needed that 50 minutes. Uh,
Yes,
um,
man.
but so I wouldn't complain about a 50 minutes because, yeah, there's so much. And here's a question for you. So when in the moment when Jean slash Madeline slash whatever uh, is facing off with Sinister, and Sinister says, "I'll tell you when they switched." What was your reaction to that when he offered that question?
I was curious if they were gonna give the actual answer, but then once they didn't, I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I can see this. We don't need necessarily to know." I think Scott needs to know more than anybody because he's like
Yeah,
wondering, who did I marry? We already know who he had the kid with, but
yeah,
how many memories like his Scott's psyche is all over the place and rightly so. Like you think if you put yourself in Scott's shoes and you feel like you were with someone else, but that's not someone else really. It's like it's the same person,
and
but
especially since like now that Jean and Madeline are like together in the same brain, Like that even convolutes it even more. And he's also mad at Xavier for like taking off. Like, why did you do this? Why did you give Magneto the school? All these things. And yeah, poor Scott. Poor Scott.
Yeah, I want to see if they bring in the Emma triangle next season. If they bring in her as another thing for Scott to be torn apart about. But it was nice seeing him with like he had that Cable moment of father and son, and then I really want to see what time travel shenanigans are going to come into play on this next episode because Bo DeMeo gave a Star Trek: The Next Generation episode as
Which I
his
watched
homework.
half of.
Do you and I talked about this with Shoff. Do you think they are going to pull back and reset? Because we talked about this after episode 5 and that being like that point in time that you can't change.
Sure.
Maybe they reset it after that point. Maybe Cable goes back and he's able to reset anyone who died after the Genosha. So we can't get Gambit back, we can't get Leech back, but maybe we can get anyone else who's kind of been taken out after that. Do you think, or do you think it's
Because it seemed to be in this episode, in the end of this episode, that there were a lot of people dying. Like
yes?
Jean, was that it? Was it just Jean?
Yeah,
Jean,
that's
possibly
what it
Cable.
feels like. Yeah, and Wolverine getting his like what is the extent of his injuries, right? Like we know from the comics, but in this show, what is the
Right.
extent of him getting the metal pulled out of his body? Do they immediately reverse that in the next episode and Cable goes back and does the time loop? Or does man, there's so many possibilities, there's so many ways that they could go with time travel.
Timey
And
wimey wibbly wobbly stuff.
yes, that
Yeah.
man, which I always loved the little cube that comes out of his arm, the little Siri virtual assistant, and talked about body sliding. And I always that part of Cable I always loved. But
Yeah.
I want to know what is Cable's mental state after this. And I talked to Shaw a little bit earlier in this episode. I think him I think he does end up killing Jean, and then what that's the thing that kind of severs his connection with Sinister. Because Madeline had a little bit of that where Jean kind of appealed to her, um, her emotional side, and that's what broke her connection to Sinister. I think Cable having that realization, like I basically killed my mom, that's gonna set him off and be like, oh no, I gotta go back and reset this. This is something that can't stand, right? And what drives him? What
But
motivates
even though if he
Cable?
does reset it, he's still going to remember doing it.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
still going to, cause some damage. And like, how much is the tend organic virus going to affect him? Because he used his powers and he usually doesn't. So, yeah, interesting stuff.
Man. I mean, if they go back, if he does the time loop, he would do it before he used his powers. So that would pull back the techno organic virus. But even getting to that point of being able to use the time travel, if that organic virus is causing him to be on the sidelines and he can't move or whatever. So all of
Bishop,
that stuff.
I've come to bargain.
Yes. And where's Bishop? Where is he?
Where is Bishop? That's a good point. Because Cable's been here. Where is Bishop? That's a good point.
Yeah, so I want to get to the bottom of all these things, Tim, but we only have 6 days now until the next episode, until this all of these things get resolved. I'm going to be stalking Bo DeMeo on Twitter up until then, and I think this season has been a really fun ride so far,
Yes.
and I'm hoping that they can really stick this landing. I have faith that they will because there has not been a single bad episode in this season, so I don't think the finale is going to be
impressive.
I'm
Because
hoping.
it's had as much episodes except one more than WandaVision, and even WandaVision had an episode like, okay, I wasn't a fan of that one, but yeah, every episode has been phenomenal, and that's impressive.
Yeah, that is something, and we were not expecting this. Like we all wanted it to be good, but I don't think we were expecting this level of quality. So,
Sure. I mean,
man,
I was expecting just like, okay, it'll be a nostalgia fest. Like, okay, that's fine. I guess that's okay. But it's just moved thing. Like it's been a very compelling X-Men story. And I said I saw something where, every X-Men like story that we've gotten on screen, either in movie, TV, has been good mutant stories because it's always been
Yes.
Wolverine and his buddies. But this has been a really good X-Men story, and so much so that it makes me want to go back to those old comics and read really other good X-Men stories. So, yeah, that's basically the triumph of this show is, telling a really, really compelling X-Men story. And
Yes.
the ball is in their court to do that just as good as the movies because, yeah, it's I don't know, TV's so weird with superhero stories where, like you have a really good TV show and then you have the same character. And like, this is my problem with Superman is like all the Superman TV shows are great. Smallville, Superman the Animated Series, Superman and Lois, those are wonderful. But unfortunately, I've had to deal with some duds of Superman movies over the past like decade or so. Superman Returns, which is fine, and Man of Steel. We won't talk about that here. But um, but yeah, it'll be interesting because those like Superman is nailed on TV, but for some reason he's not nailed on movies as well. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with the X-Men going forward, not only in X-Men 97, but also in films.
Yes. We'll talk about Superman a little bit more when we review My Adventures with Superman Season 2. Tim and I are going to be joined by Frank and another Tim Gannon from the Beer with Geeks podcast. So we'll be talking about that. Stay tuned at the end of this month for more coverage on that. Stay tuned next week as we're going to be talking X-Men 97 Season 1 wrap-up on This Comic Cooks.